Good morning. Deputy Secretary General Joanna, Vice President Šefčovič, Minister Aurescu, distinguished members of the audience. It is an honor to welcome you to the 2021 Atlantic Black Sea Security Forum. I'd like to thank the Bucharest office of the German Marshall Fund and the Aspen Institute team for making this event happen. Our theme for this year is democratic security and resilience in the era of great power competition. Over the next 3 days, we will share high-level perspective on the most pressing topics on the international security agenda. This year's edition will focus on technological advances and their impact on security, with the aim of achieving long-term resilience in the Black Sea area and beyond. The pandemic continues to be on the agenda, but our discussions will be far broader. The concept of security has evolved from a narrow understanding of protection from military threats to encompass resilience in the face of diverse range of global threats such as cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and environmental disasters. Nowadays, illiberal or extremist tendencies are also serious threats to the transatlantic values, but also to political and security system. The expansion of these tendencies, unchecked by the global emergency of the COVID-19 pandemic, has catalyzed to affect most of our countries as well as international organizations. Emerging and disruptive technology play a key role in the changing security environment as they represent a cheap and effective tactics for actors trying to destabilize democratic societies. In this context, Romania will establish and host, through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Euro-Atlantic Centers for the Resilience, EARC. This project emerged at a time when national assessments, but also those of NATO and EU, indicates the need for intensifying joint efforts for efficiently addressing a more extensive range of challenges. In this respect, this project represents a concrete and strategic initiative of Romania, contributing to the consolidation of the resilience of NATO, EU, and that of their member states as well as of their partners. The center was designed to function as an expertise hub in the field of resilience. EARC will also engage with the private sector, academia, international research institution, and civil society to foster a societal resilience approach. Aspen Institute Romania is ready to commit its body of expertise in the field of resilience, as well as its infrastructure and international network. As a businessman, I would underline that a strong economy is critical to building security and stability in the Black Sea region. Private investment in regional economies should complement Western diplomatic efforts and military security cooperation efforts. Encouraging investment in our region of business from the United States and EU gives those nations skin in the game. Having real economic interest means these countries will care about any hostile interference with freedom of navigation, violation of borders, illegal annexation, etc. The nexus between geopolitical interests, security, and the balanced energy mix remains as relevant as always given the current state of international relations. Energy is being used as a political tool by external powers trying to increase their influence in the EU and its neighborhood. At the same time, the European Green Deal is paving the way for a sustainable carbon-neutral economy, even through potential tensions between national and European perspective on energy policy might impede a common approach. The forum is organized under the aegis of the Aspen Public Programs and the Aspen National Security and Defense Program. Saying the word Aspen so many times reminds me that we are celebrating the 15th anniversary of the Romanian chapter of the Aspen Institute. Seeing illustrious experts of the highest caliber participating in these panels fills me with both pride, but also a deep sense of gratitude for the teams that are working hard to bring you all together. I could not have dreamed 16 years ago when three friends, led by Mr. Joanna, went to present the idea of setting up an Aspen Institute Romania, that we will get to where we are today. I humbly thank you all for making this event a reality. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I will not be reading from the podium because I already have the microphone on. Thank you very much for joining us today for what is finally an in-person meeting on security, a very important, I would say, meeting on security, and not at least resilience. Each year, I open the forum contemplating the ever-increasing landscape, security landscape, social landscape, and whining actually, about how difficult it is to put all of this into an agenda and to skew all of these issues and challenges into panels. This year is absolutely no different. Pandemic still lingers. Aggressive multipolarity is taking even more shape. And the definition of security enlarges and grows more and more complex by the day. It is against this background that we had to put together the agenda and, as I said, the panels. Moreover, to make things even more complicated, there are numerous conferences these days on resilience. Resilience this, resilience that, resilience here, resilience everywhere. However, the Black Sea Security Forum that we opened today is different. It is different because for the last year, 3 teams put together, the Aspen Institute Romania, German Marshall Fund, Bucharest, and our knowledge partner, a True Story Project, have looked at resilience, have studied resilience, have read materials about resilience. We looked at the NATO 7 key requirements for resilience. We looked at the strategic foresight plan that the Vice President present here is putting together. We looked at everything that analysts had to say about resilience, and we tried to compile all this together into the agenda that you'll be following through the next 3 days. As serendipity would have it, we are very fortunate that today we have with us people who have worked very, very hard, very intensely to create the Romania Resilience Center, EARC, which has already been mentioned, which is actually being inaugurated today. So not only we have here people who will tell us about all the effort and all the thinking behind this, but we'll be able to, tonight, this evening, to actually inaugurate and open the center. Yet this forum, this year's forum, is not about analysis, it's not as much about ideas as it is about action. We have put together people from government, people from outside government, people who are thinking, people who are doing, people who are critical, people who are very little critical, people who have done things, people who want to do things on the same panels. And we are trying to bring together new and old in an effort to look towards the future and how we can increase resilience, and not any So not only resilience in general, but democratic resilience, because one thing which we found missing from the 7 key requirements of NATO, from the foresight strategic plan of the European Commission, is a stronger focus on democracy, it's a stronger focus on liberalism, it's a stronger focus on fighting the illiberal tendencies. But all of this we'll be talking about in today's and tomorrow's and the day after tomorrow's forum, as I said. I hope we succeeded in putting together this agenda. And with this, without further ado, we'll go right into the first panel of the forum. So I do invite Mr. Mircea Joană to the Mr. Mircea Joană, Mr. Maroš Sefcovic, and Mr. Bogdan Aurescu to join me on the podium.
Okay.
We have to wait for a few seconds because I was told we have a little intro. We keep going? Okay. Thank you again very much for joining me for this panel, for the opening panel of the forum. We'll be looking at what the 3 institutions, NATO, European Commission, and the government of Romania are doing, have been doing, are planning on doing when it comes to resilience. And in order to tackle all this, not only the ideas, as I was saying earlier, but also the actions behind these ideas, we have the honor of having with us 3 very important distinguished guests. We have the Vice President of the Commission, Maroš Sefcovic. We have the NATO Deputy Secretary General Mircea Joană, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania, Bogdan Aurescu. Mr. Joană, I would like to start with you because NATO has been putting quite a lot of thinking into resilience. There has been a summit which mentioned resilience. There is a NATO action plan looking forward to 2030, which is named towards a more resilient alliance. So there's been a lot of effort and thinking. How does resilience look from where you are now in Brussels at the NATO headquarters, and what needs to be done to increase it even further?
Thank you, Alina. Maroš, so good to be together with you, and Bogdan Aurescu, thank you for your constant leadership on these very important topics. By the way, tomorrow we'll have the Foreign Ministers meeting of NATO, also the Defense Ministerial of NATO, paving the way to the NATO summit on June 14th. And Florin Pogonaru and our Aspen team, also Alina, the GMF Bucharest office, thank you so much for being such staunch and perseverant actors into all this. And I'm here in my first official visit to my home country, which is pretty weird. It's pretty interesting. And I'm here basically for 3 reasons. Number 1, to be part of the 3rd part of the most important NATO exercise of the year, Steadfast Defender 21. More than 28,000 allied troops from all allied nations, from the United States to Portugal and Spain and all the way to the Black Sea, for 3 weeks or more, we'll be doing the most important deterrence and defense exercise. Secondly, because I received this wonderful invitation from Minister Aurescu for the launch of the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center that Romania is proposing. I understand that this is something that will be offered both to NATO, and we are looking forward with anticipation to this partnership, but also to the European Union. And I'm very happy that Vice President Sefcovic is here because he's doing a lot of work. The dashboards is very important for NATO and EU to basically work together. And I'm convinced that this new center in Bucharest will be doing this for NATO, for the EU, and also for other like-minded organizations and partners. Now, coming back to resilience. You know, this is now the buzzword. Everywhere you go, there is something on resilience. That's a very fashionable term these days. But the beauty of NATO is that we've been working and thinking ahead on resilience since 2016. At the Warsaw NATO summit, the leaders, in a sort of a foresight, Maros, in a sort of anticipating some trends in a way, they instructed us, NATO, to start looking into resilience. What does it mean? And of course, like a very serious, organized, structured organization, we started to look into a few of the components of resilience as we understood it in 2016. We identified, as Alina mentioned, 7 baseline requirements on resilience, from everything from continuity of government and governmental services in times of crisis, all the way to civil-military cooperation, transportation, energy, telecommunications, and everything in between. But then this pandemic that is still unfortunately with us came and struck all of us, all over the world, but also across Europe and across the transatlantic community. And we started to look with even more intensity to how can we make sure that these indicators of resilience can be developed, can be broadened, and can also be more helpful to the nations part of the alliance. So I spoke a little bit about the summit on June 14th. We'll be coming with renewed political energy. Secretary General, in his NATO 2030 proposal for the future of the alliance, has put a big emphasis on resilience. We anticipate that our leaders, President Iohannis, in the case of representing Romania at the summit, to give us the green light to go to the next iteration of resilience indicators. We are now working, as we speak, on a resilience pledge, very similar to the cyber pledge that we have adopted a few years ago, also in Warsaw, when cyber was part of the discussion. And also, of course, we recognize the sovereign right of nations to look into its own resilience. But I think NATO, and I think the EU, is a unique platform to making sure that we are approaching resilience in a very integrated and a very lessons learned kind of mode. I work with the Vice President Šefčovič also institutionally, not because we are friends for many years. We've been knowing each other for many decades already, Maros. But luckily enough, we are both on the two sides of Brussels, myself in NATO, when Jens Stoltenberg asked me to pay special attention to NATO-EU relationship, which I do, and Maros Šefčovič in his institutional capacity. And now we are working, hopefully even after the summer, before the summer break, into some form of structured dialogue between NATO and EU on resilience. And again, we anticipate that the input from the Resilience Center that will be kicked off today in Bucharest will also be part of this conversation. So, to cut a long story short, NATO is always adapting. NATO is always about anticipating threats. And the name of the game is that while we do deterrence and defense, which is something that is the bread and butter of this alliance, that's why steadfast defender, that's why so many things we do, we also have to look into the broader definition of security. Resilience, new technologies, climate change and security, space, these are a new definition of security, and again we count on Romania, a valued ally in NATO, and I think a very, very active EU member state. And to close, something about technology. I applaud the fact that Romania was able to convince and to obtain the European Union Cyber Competence Center in Bucharest. That's a huge achievement. And I speak now putting aside my NATO hat and taking back my national hat a little bit. And I do believe that when the two centers will be up and running, the Resilience Center and the Cyber Center, this will be also the beginning of an ecosystem of innovation. And if you want sophistication in this new definition of security, and I'm happy to see that newer allies into NATO and newer member states into the EU are also coming to a level of maturity and influence in both organizations. So I'm here to applaud this initiative from Romania and to say that we are interested in supporting it and also making sure that it serves both NATO and EU and other interested partners.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary General. Mr. Vice President Šefčovič, in one of the papers, in one of the reports which was published by the Commission on Resilience, I found the most interesting definition of resilience, and I will quote it: ability to withstand and cope with challenges, but also to transform in a sustainable, fair, and democratic manner. Tell us a little bit about how resilience is being seen from where you sit. You have a huge portfolio, which includes strategic foresight, which I find absolutely fascinating. I hope that you can share some of the steps you want to take in this regard with our listeners. What is resilience for the European Commission? Is it different from the one from NATO? You have 4 fields you have identified for resilience. NATO has 7 key requirements. How is resilience from where you sit, and how do you coordinate it with other institutions, NATO first and foremost?
Well, first and foremost, thank you very much, Alina, for the word, but I really would like to thank Bogdan and Mircea for the kind invitation. I have to say it was my foreign trip after many months, so we kind of are getting back, hopefully, to normal also with our intensive contacts with international travel and kind of catching up where we kind of left from before the COVID crisis, which kind of put us into this online world from one day into another. And if you look at COVID-19 and the assessment, what this phenomenon kind of caused to the mankind. So very often you have such two major characteristics. One, that it served as a great accelerator of positive and negative trends. I mean, we just had to submerge from one day into another to do everything online, even to talk to our loved ones. The kids had to learn through the computer screens, and we had to run the business, governments, and international organizations through these online chats. But also it also accelerated, I would say, growing gap between haves and have-nots. We saw what kind of strain it puts on democratic running of the societies. And another characteristics, I think, which is also very much present, and I think we still feel the shockwaves, is that the COVID-19 is also perceived as a great divider, that it's kind of brings this divide into the societies. We see, you know, how difficult it was for the democratically elected governments to find the right strategies, how you know, we're still struggling to make sure that also developing countries would have the adequate number of the vaccines so we can like cope with this, I would say, biggest health crisis ever we had in our world. So, I mean, this is a really completely new situation, and therefore we had to learn how to act in this new environment. And therefore, in my case, I'm the first commissioner ever responsible for strategic foresight, because we felt, and our president Ursula von der Leyen, as a former defense minister, also felt that we need a better ability for anticipatory governance. Mm-hmm. That we have to kind of use that huge brain potential we have in the European Union to kind of peek over the horizon, look around the corner. So we would not be surprised by, you know, these mega crises which are affecting our daily lives, as it was with financial crisis, migration crisis, and now with COVID-19 crisis. So therefore, we are now trying to link up all the, I would say, big brains, big institutions to work together on making a foresight much better and much more present in our decision making. When I'm talking to my colleagues, I'm always explaining that for foresight to be strategic, it has to be politically relevant. It has to bring the value added to the decision makers and policy makers. It has to be very, very practical in what we do, and therefore also our first strategic foresight report was exactly on resilience. And the decision was taken after, I would say, the first dramatic months we have seen in Europe, where suddenly we realized that the global value chains are not working as they're supposed to do, that suddenly interrupted transport lines caused huge problems with health protection material, we discovered that, some medicaments we are not producing anymore in Europe, and simply that it was affecting almost every value chain which we have in the European Union. And therefore, I think that the world resilience became part of our policies, and we are now assessing and treating resilience, as we call it, as a strategic compass for all our policies in the future. And of course, natural partner for that would be the NATO. And therefore, I was so pleased where Mircea came to the position of Deputy Secretary General, because not only we know each other for ages, but I know that he knows both words of NATO and EU very well, and we can actually work on this structured cooperation for the future. I'm very impressed by what Romania is doing in this area, and that Romania is actually investing a lot in Europe, and Romania being more resilient. We already mentioned the Cyber Security Center. I'm very glad that I could participate at the opening of this Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center, because this is exactly areas where we need to work together, and I'm glad that Romania was not kind of waiting until we will have an overall consensus, but just simply did go for it, and I think that's very important. And if you mentioned the importance of resilience and foresight, I think that in Romania you also feel that you are in very strategic location, that the Black Sea Basin is kind of becoming this crossroad of geopolitical competition, not only because of energy or transport infrastructure, but also because of political interest of these major powers. And unfortunately, speaking about the Great Divide, we see that we are kind of in a period where we are departing from multilateral to more multipolar world, where we have these competing big powers, and we, I think, as democracies, as the EU, as a NATO, simply have to be better prepare for it. And therefore we went for also a bit more scientific approach how to assess our resilience. So we went for these 4 major dimensions: green, digital, societal, social, and geopolitical, where we also want to kind of present the picture how the EU looks like member states to member states, but also EU vis-a-vis the major competitors. And we hope that it would also serve us as a good mirror when we will be investing this unprecedented amount of public finances, is 1.82 trillion euros into kickstarting of our economy in the form of the next budget and recovery and resilience facility. Are we progressing in being more resilient or not? And I think we would need very honest discussion about how this how all these finances will be spent. Maybe 2 pieces of the information and suggestion again to our colleagues for cooperation. It was, I think, 10 days ago when we had our informal meeting of the Ministers for European Affairs. We established what I call the network of the Ministers for the Future. Because I think that in each government we need a minister who would be kind of responsible for strategic foresight, collecting all the great ideas for the institutes like Aspen, from different think tanks, also from private sector, because very often they are very good in projecting what is ahead of us, and kind of filtering them out. What are the most important pieces of information the policymakers should have and should work with? And I know that in NATO you are thinking about resilience, the ministers, so I think it would be maybe good to get these 2 structures, Ministers for Future, Minister for Resilience, to actually talk to each other and work very closely, and I think that it would definitely bring very positive results. And the last piece of information I would share with you is that from all that analysis which we did over the last year, we decided to have the next annual strategic foresight report on the open strategic autonomy. So exactly to define what it means that we've been always for the free trade, but now we are also adding the word fair free trade. So we will not be kind of subject to hostile takeovers by the international giants subsidized by cheap governmental money, putting our, let's say, critical infrastructure under a lot of stress. at the same time, to look for all the critical products and materials we need for our, I would say, economic performance and for our sovereignty, and to make sure that we are masters of our destinies also in the future, and just simply to be able to make sure that that strategic autonomy, which, as I was reminded by our Greek colleagues, comes from a Greek word which says liberty of action, that we would have the freedom to act at our own terms. And I think that's something very important, and I'm sure that we will have occasion to discuss our strategic foresight report on open strategic autonomy at some of our next discussion. But thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you, and looking forward to the report. Mr. Minister, I think Romania is doing one more step in proving that resilience is not only a buzzword, and there have been a lot of, as I mentioned already, actions and thinking in translating this somewhat into practice. Please share with us what Romania has done, what Romania is planning on doing, and how all of this is going to get in shape.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me today. It's a great opportunity, and really honored to be on the same stage with the Deputy Secretary General of NATO and with the Vice President of the Commission for Institutional Relations and Foresight. It's a great opportunity to discuss about the way for the NATO and the EU respond to these challenges, because this is the title of this panel, Responding to Challenges in a Post-Pandemic World. And indeed, I think the focus put on resilience in both EU and NATO frameworks, and the fact that Romania has embarked on this project of creating a Euro-Atlantic Center for Resilience is in fact the result of a reflection process that was started last year. This was, of course, prompted by the pandemic. In the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I have created already in the first month of the last year a task force to discuss and think foresight. What could be the answer and the reactions and how to adapt after the pandemic, our action, the diplomatic thinking, and at the same time the diplomatic activity. How to adapt to these new challenges, which are coming from various corners, from consular affairs and the need to help in a more efficient way our citizens abroad, which were stranded in some very far away corners of the world, to adapting our core diplomatic action to this new reality. At the same time, within NATO and within the European Union, the same reflection process started, and now we are in a very interesting inflection point. If we take a look at the fact that, on one hand, within the EU, we have started the Conference on the Future of Europe, which will be the great opportunity for everybody, citizens, institutions, states, parliaments, governments, civil society, to think in a collective manner on the new European Union and how to make it more efficient, closer to the citizens, more able to respond to the security and prosperity needs of the citizens on the street. On the other hand, we have the NATO 2030 process, another very important reflection process started last year. And this is going on, and we will have the opportunity, for instance, tomorrow, during the two Foreign Affairs and Defense Ministerials, to discuss where we are with this reflection process and how the preparation for the summit is going on. Then we will have the summit on the 14th of June, and that would be another great opportunity for our leaders to take important decisions on making NATO more relevant politically, stronger militarily, and with a more global projection. And we will have then the new strategic concept, because I hope, and I'm very much convinced, that this will be perhaps the most important decision of the summit on the 14th of June in Brussels. And I'm very glad that not last year, sorry, I'm still thinking of the last year, it's in my mind, 2020 cannot be erased just like that. In 2019, during the NATO ministerial at the end of the year, I think I was the first foreign minister to ask for a new strategic concept to be prepared. And I'm glad that now it's, becoming, reality. And this process of negotiating a new strategic concept of the alliance will be, again, one very good opportunity for the alliance to be able to shape its response, including to the challenges which ask for more resilience. So this is how the resilience became so important. Resilience means, first of all, putting into, the best shape the good reactions that we had out of the crisis, more solidarity, more international cooperation, at the EU level shaping the EU for Health program. And I think we need more of that in the near future. In NATO, to see what was the response to the needs of the member states and the partners. And we had the NATO Pandemic Trust Fund, which was very effective in helping the allies and partners. We have used the strategic airlift capability of NATO to transport essential medical equipment that we need. For instance, we were, Romania, the first country, member state of NATO to use the strategic airlift capability to bring essential medical equipment from South Korea during the pandemic. Then we have, of course, helped others because we were also the first EU member state to use the rescue mechanism, and we have helped also member states and partners. So this is extremely important. All these processes are coming together. And on one hand, as I mentioned, we need to make best use of the good practices that we have developed and the good responses that we had. On the other hand, to counter those reactions which were not the right answers, because we have seen unilateral approaches, individualistic behaviors. We have seen this tendency to use the pandemic by, not like-minded actors, to put it diplomatically, in a way to influence our decision-making process in both foreign policy and security affairs. And we have to resist to that. So resilience means also working together with the like-minded partners. This means also working together with the United States. And this goes, both for NATO, because the transatlantic partnership is the backbone of the alliance and of Article 5. But it goes as well as far as EU is concerned, because we need a transatlantic link. We need this partnership being reinforced, and I'm so glad that we will have, just back-to-back with the NATO summit, the EU-United States summit. So all these, alignments show us that we are at an important inflection point, and Romania is ready to play its role. So you mentioned already, it's not a secret that today we will have the great pleasure to inaugurate the headquarters of the Euro-Atlantic Center for Resilience, this project that we were working for already for, I think, 9 months now. It was a process which came up with just only an idea, taking a look at the international environment in Europe, the Euro-Atlantic space, and we thought that it is important to create a body which, of course, does not compete with other, because there are also some other excellence centers or other centers which are covering some important aspects, responding to the set of challenges that we are now facing, but to focus on specific areas. And we will focus on societal resilience. We will focus on resilience of our partners from negative interference from outside the Euro-Atlantic and European space. And in here, it's normal that if we want to be resilient, our neighbors and our partners in the neighborhood should be resilient as well. We have to help them build their own capacities for resisting to and responding to these risks, challenges, and threats. We will focus on the resilience of infrastructure, communication infrastructure, transport infrastructure. We will focus on some other clusters of interest. For instance, the response to emerging and to disruptive technologies. So all these will be shaped in 7 working groups or community of interests within the Euro-Atlantic Center for Resilience, and we will try to attract not only the best Romanian experts in this area, but our goal is to make it international and attract experts from the EU member states, from the NATO member states, and from our partners in the region. So this is in a nutshell where we are with the center. I hope that today we will be able, of course, during the inauguration ceremony to explain more about the relevance of this center. It is relevant also in the context of, as I mentioned, the incoming NATO summit, because we will be focusing a lot on resilience in the coming years. But it is relevant in general. It is relevant for the debate at the level of the EU as well. I will stop here and...
Thank you, Minister Aurescu. I will turn to the audience. If there are questions to either of the speakers, please raise your hand like the lady here, and you'll be given a microphone, hopefully, by my colleagues, so you can ask the question. It's coming. Be patient with us. And please introduce yourself so we know who's asking the question.
Thank you. Kim Dozier with Time Magazine. I wanted to ask the minister if he could get specific on what he would do to build the resilience of the communication and transport infrastructure, and what specifically went wrong that you're referring to. And for the other panelists, how do you prepare for future pandemics when we're still recovering economically from this one? Does that mean taking from defense budgets or health budgets and diverting it? And once this crisis is passed, how do you make that argument? Because, you know, humans, we go with the next crisis first.
Thank you. I will take one more question, if there is one more question, before turning to the panelists. All right. No, not for now. Minister Aurescu, would you like to start and answer the question that the lady has asked?
Well, I'm not going to give you too much of details for the time being, but I think it's quite obvious that the transport infrastructure is critical. And it's critical not only for the society, for the economy, but also in terms of military mobility. So ensuring the resilience of the infrastructure, I think it's extremely important, of the existing infrastructure. And of course, it is also important to promote new, relevant, necessary infrastructure. As far as communication is concerned, well, it's absolutely obvious that, well, cybersecurity and, the resilience of the networks of communication is also key for, ensuring the well-functioning of the response to a crisis, for instance. We will focus also, we will have a specific community of interests for, dealing with, the continuity of governance and the ability to cope with ongoing or sudden crisis. So all these communities of interest will work in an interconnected, systemic manner. But I will give you more details when they will exist, of course, in the near future.
No, thank you for the question, and let me tell you a little bit of context here. Because when we started to look into resilience some 6 years ago, we were in a logic of a whole of government approach, because you need various agencies, you need the center of the government, you also needed subnational entities, because many nations are federal nations, big cities, big communities. But as we evolved with our thinking on resilience, we gradually moved, and we are today at the issue of societal resilience, which means that this is beyond governments. This is the private sector, which is a hugely important part of the discussion. And then, of course, is civil society and our public opinions. because that's also a matter of trust. That's a matter of these huge disinformation campaigns, these fake news, and these invented stories that are so much over the place. So as we are shifting from government to societies, we are also looking into making sure that we understand together better by learning from each other. And that's the beauty of NATO as a convening platform. That's, I think, the beauty of the EU, as EU member states are sharing many things together. Because as we speak, in each of the nations, in America, in the US, in Canada, in Romania, in Sweden, which is not NATO, it's a very close partner of NATO, or Finland, give you an example. There are Fdi screening efforts. Some countries do have legislation for Fdi screening, just to make sure that when you do something, you look into what kind of capital, what kind of trusted capital. And this is not only about who's investing in my ports, in my airports, in my logistics centers, but who's investing in my startups, who's putting money, and from which source is that money coming from when a startup wants to go and grow. Venture capital. All these things are things that we just cannot do alone. We have to do it together. Of course, NATO, and I think not even the EU, we're not in the business of imposing things on nations, but basically to develop common standards. These baseline requirements are in fact indicators for resilience. So this is something that Maros also mentioned, something which is critically important, which is our telecoms. There was a big discussion which will be amplified by the 5G revolution, or 6G. We already think of 6G. Or you can look also into what the Commission is doing, US is doing this, into what they call rare materials, the sources for our microchips, for our high-end products, for space. So the idea is not basically to have a very prescriptive thing, but also to have a toolkit, toolboxes that all of our democratic nations can share together, be stronger together. And I cannot emphasize how much I appreciate what the Aspen Institute here in Romania and the GMF Bucharest office are offering to the Romanian government in terms of private, public, non-governmental, the triple helix. So that's a big, big thing. And of course, as Minister Aurescu has said, we anticipate that at the NATO summit, there will be, of course, on many other issues, but on resilience, there will be renewed effort, and we're looking forward to engaging with this. Just one word on the other side of the coin, because resilience is how you bounce back from a crisis, in fact. Okay, and how do you make sure that you get back to normal as soon as possible? But there is the other side of the coin, which is fragility. Fragility of our partners in many of the neighborhoods of Europe and of the transatlantic space is also something of concern. That's why in NATO we are engaging with the OECD that has been developing fragility indicators, and we are now looking forward to engaging also with them, also with the Commission, in making sure that we do these things together. This is why this center proposed by Romania could be a very interesting way to help lessons learned, digestion and implementation, and to basically reach out to the private sector and academia, making sure that this is not just something coming from governments, but is also something from the depth of our societal resilience. That's the approach we have in NATO.
Thank you. I would add that there is a third side of this coin, if that is at all possible, which is the resilience of our opponents, which is the resilience of the illiberal systems, governing systems, which I think we also have to take into consideration. But Vice President Šefčovič also probably wanted to answer the question.
Thank you very much. Maybe I will, because both answers have been excellent, so I will extrapolate a little bit on that medical aspect of the current crisis. I mean, when we've been, I would say, the heat of the worst moments of the pandemics, we had special sessions of commissioners every morning, 9 o'clock, getting the latest briefings and preparing for what to do next. And what was, of course, very important part of those meetings been the discussions we had with eminent scientists, eminent virologists. And one warning which came from them, which I remember, which I'm going to share with you, was that it might be a sign that we are kind of entering the age of pandemics because of the interconnectedness of the world and because of the, I would say, permanent human pressure on biodiversity. So kind of reducing the space where the animals are living because of agriculture, because of, expansion of our cities and so on and so forth. So we better be prepared for it. And I think we had really a hard lesson now I'm speaking about the global human community over the last year. So what the lessons we have taken in the European Union? The first one was that we have to dramatically increase the production capability of the required medicines, of the vaccines, and we kind of, I think, managed in very short period of time to kind of turn the tables around this question. And now we have, I think the latest is around 250, 260 million Europeans vaccinated. But what is even more important at this stage is that we are the only major economy exporting vaccine outside of the European Union, and we exported more than 200 million doses so far. So more or less the same volume of the vaccines which we are supplying with our member states, we are supplying also outside the world. And I think that we are going to use that potential also to continue being I would say, major donor for COVAX, and to make sure that this production capacity, which is in Europe, will be shared also with other parts of the world, because we know that until we get this pandemic under control everywhere in the world, it will always come back and haunt us, probably with more deadly variants, with more transmissible, diseases, and we just simply have to be ready for that, not only as Europeans, but as a global community. On top of it, we realized that we would need to be much faster in developing new medicaments, in developing new vaccines. Therefore, we are establishing something which is called HERA, which is kind of new incubator and accelerator for advanced biomedicine research in Europe, just simply to be prepared for this need to really make very rapid advancement in therapeutic medicines, in developing the new vaccines, in having the right scientists at the right place with the right amount of financial support, because I think clearly this would be needed. And currently we have in Europe 50 production facilities for different kind of vaccines, because there are several stages and each one of them is very important. And we are kind of prospecting also other facilities across the whole, I would say, Europe, where we can kind of use this European potential to or start the production or prepare these facilities for the future production. So I think that would be, I think, very very important for the future. And maybe the last point, which was made by Alina on democracies. I think now we again see a little bit the shifting of the perception, because at the beginning, there was a lot of skepticism. If you are living in the democratic country, it takes forever to take the decision, and to decide, and simply it's the very very long process. So I think the jury is out, but I think that we as a democratic world are doing pretty well if it comes to tackling the vaccines, that we mobilize the resources. We've been going with a positive campaign to convince our people what needs to be done. The tough decisions been taken in many of our member states. I think the lockdowns through which we had to live through across the member states been very difficult, but they've been adopted in democratic way, by democratically elected government, and it was respected despite of all the, of course, difficulties which it comes with. So I think that once we will be doing some kind of assessment, how did we cope with this crisis, despite the fact it was unprecedented. Nobody was prepared for it, and that we had to deal with it in a truly democratic way. I think we did well. We did well, and we just need to learn the lessons to do better next time, because unfortunately, now how, the world is interconnected, that you can have the virus from one part of the world to land up in the plane just across the globe within 10 to 12 hours is something we have to cope with, and we have to be better prepared for it.
I didn't answer the money question. How much would this cost? We are now in the midst of one of the most massive, accelerated, structural transformations of human society in history. We never had such a compression of time and so many structural changes, from geopolitics, from technological revolution, to this pandemic, to the way in which we as human beings and us as democratic societies are looking at the world. So if I'm looking to where we are going, I would say we have four big dimensions, like, the North Star. One is, of course, the huge change that digitalization and technologies in its applications wherever, in every dimension of human activity, are bringing. That's a big, big reality. The second one is fighting climate change. Also in NATO, we are looking into the security implications of climate change, and this will also be a huge transformative force across the board. And by the way, this is beyond competition and geopolitical competition, because for climate change we need the whole planet, including countries that we don't see eye to eye on many other things. On these things we need to work together. Then is resilience, which has a cost, but is not necessarily a governmental cost per se. It's a cost which is an investment, because having more reliable supply chains, making sure that in times of difficulty you can service your population and you can really do the kind of things that you're supposed to be doing, this is also a cost that also the business sector and other segments will need to invest into. And then that's the third part, which is resilience. So you have digital, you have climate change, you have resilience, and then, of course, and not the last one, is national security requirements. Because that's something that will not go away and shouldn't go away. Because many of the other things I'm mentioning also do have a national security issue. That's a big transformation in the thinking. Each of the governments around the world are thinking about these kind of things. So that's why when it comes to NATO, it's not for us to say, you should be, private corporation, you should invest more in your supply. It's their sovereign decision. We are here to really give a more homogeneous, educated, transversal, sophisticated, and forward-looking matrix of the factors, and then each of us, human beings individually, human communities, a small business, a huge global corporation, a small government, a small local government, a big national government, will be in the situation to navigate in a predictable way towards the uncharted seas of the future. That's why NATO and the EU, we are so important, and that's why we need to work together, even closer, in complementarity, doing things together, because we are two sides of the same coin, the democratic West. And that's why we do believe that this is our role, is not to tell each one how much should you invest. It's not about defense spending here, which is a different thing. The Wales pledge is there, will be reconfirmed at the summit. That's a different story. But we are speaking about how human societies transform, and also how can we uphold our democratic societies, which are a huge pressure also from within. Not every fracture in our society is produced by malign foreign actors. Some of the things, the discontent of our public opinions are for real, for causes which are ours. Inequality, impact of climate change, things that are basically short-sighted investments in many things. So that's one of the most important transformative periods in human history. And we are here to say that we understand the complexity of the problem, and we are trying to find appropriate answers to that.
Alina, if you just allow me two more points. Mircea prompted me to this thought, and I hope it would be interesting for the audience, because he was talking about economic resilience and, of course, the climate change. I'm also, in many of my different responsibility, I am responsible for heading the European Battery Alliance. Why I'm mentioning it? Because in this way, we are for the first time putting into the concrete legislative proposals the concept of competitive sustainability. Because we realized in the economy of the 21st century, if it comes, for example, for the manufacturing of batteries, we do not want to compete anymore just on price. Because simply we cannot kind of factor the low price as an only determinant if we know that the low price was achieved at the expense of environment, at the expense of human rights, at the expense of simply ruining the life of the generations which will come after us. Therefore, what we are proposing in this landmark legislation, and I hope that it will become the new global standard, is that, for example, each battery will have a digital passport. It means what is the carbon footprint of that battery? Were the critical raw materials sourced ethically? How they will be used after their lifetime? What is the recycle plan? And so that it has to be the whole, I would say, value chain has to be assessed, reflected, and that would be our, I would say, competitive advantage of advanced economy. Did you use renewable energy to produce it? What kind of conditions being there for, producing these concrete products. And I think that it brings us to another very big topic, which I'm glad was very much supported by the European leaders at the Porto Social Summit, that we just have to accelerate our thinking to go beyond GDP. Because if you look at traditional GDP comparisons, very often you are kind of, attributing the value of growth to the activities which have very adverse effect for the future of the planet and for the future of the mankind. So therefore our work on dashboards, therefore our work on these new data sets, because we see it as a basis for, measuring the well-being and the growth in a new way, which is much better reflecting the realities of the 21st century economy. Thank you. Thank
you. I will take one last question, and then I will come back to the speakers and ask you to answer the respective question and also do your last remarks so we can end on time. I'm mindful of the time. I know that Vice President Sefcovic has an interview to do. Iulian Chifu.
Thank you very much, Alina. Thank you. It was an excellent introduction and very much appreciate Kim's intervention. I would like to touch upon the resilience in the three layers, because you've touched upon the whole of the government, the societal resilience, but actually, as we've learned, resilience has the three layers: state institutions, society, and citizen. By the way, in terrorism and in information warfare, you can't do this without the three layers of resilience. And I'm very happy that you've introduced Alina, and we've heard comments on democratic resilience, which makes sense. So my question goes on another very interesting aspect, which is trust. You can't build resilience and taking on board all the three layers as long as you don't have a trust, confidence from citizens into their governments. And as we've seen lately, including for the democratic governments, there's actually a split between the political leadership and natural elites and the professional elites of the society. So in that respect, that will go my questions. How can you introduce trust into the mix of addressing resilience? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, I'll be very interested to see how you can measure trust on the dashboards that Vice President Sefcovic is being preparing. That's going to be quite a huge task. Should we start with you, Mr. Duran?
Yeah, I mentioned to the previous question and to Iulian's question that there is an evolution of the way in which we approach resilience and many other things. We moved from a few agencies inside national governments to a whole of government, and now we're looking to the whole of society. But there is thinking within nations, inside NATO, and also partners, also from Nordic countries. I'm convinced that the center in Bucharest will be looking into this. We are now going even more microscopically, more granularly towards citizens' resilience. Because this is, in the end, the very essence of what is, in an aggregated way, a modern society. Mm-hmm. And you cannot speak of democratic resilience without looking into the way in which our citizens have trust in public institutions. And here you see a big variation of public trust within the democratic West. There are societies that are more homogeneous, there is more public trust. Human capital, social capital, other countries that are a little bit different. We cannot have one size fits all in nothing, and even less so here. There is also another dimension of trust that can be measured, mm-hmm. but is not, measurable. So there are analytical instruments to measure that, but how to transfer that into real action, that's a more complex political issue, is the fact that we are also looking into community trust. So it's not about the citizen and the government. It's also us amongst ourselves. Do you trust your neighbor? Do you trust that when bad times happen, he or she will come to your rescue? Would you go to their rescue? Would you run the extra mile? Eventually sacrifice your own immediate, selfish, national, whatever interest to go to the other? And I think this pandemic, in a way, exacerbated both sides of human nature. Selfishness and survival instincts in the first instance, and then a level of compassion, of solidarity, of love, in a way, in a good sense of the term. So the idea is for all of us to try to make their part in this citizen resilience of sorts. Because, as I mentioned before, we are in the midst of a big conversation on not only on geopolitics, but also on the very essence of the organizing principle of human societies. Liberal democracies are perfectible. They're not a given thing. We speak about the political democratic West, including with our friends from Asia Pacific and around the world. It's not only Europe and North America. But democracy is a perfectible proposition. It's not set in stone that you have elections every 4 or 5 years or whatever you have them. Look at America, how much complex discussion is as we speak on many things that are part of that thing. The way in which we organize our economies is also part of the trust of our citizens. Capitalism is not a static proposition. Free markets is not a static proposition. Now there is a big trade-off between technology and governments, between citizens and technology, between all these things. So as long as we keep the fundamental DNA of open societies, which is permanent adaptation and transformation, recognizing that we have to do a better job in giving our citizens what they require in very explicit terms from all of us, political leadership or international organizations or whatever, that they are entitled to look for this kind of issues that make their lives happier and their kids' life happier, then we'll have trust. If we don't do that and we just keep the mantra, we are good just because we are democratic and not work to our self-improvement, I think this is the most important lesson of the pandemic and of the migration crisis and of the financial crisis, that we believe that, as famous people have said, that we were at the end of history when communists collapsed. No. We are just at the most complex transformation in human history ever. I still believe, as a Romanian and somebody has lived half my life in a different, closed society, that there is absolutely no substitute for freedom. There is absolutely no way for top-down authoritarian surveillance states to be more efficient in the end, more innovative in the end, than open, free societies.
Can I
And
end on this
that's
very
because
strong note?
I'm getting a little bit nervous when it comes to this topic.
But
So.
it might be that others do not think the same. So it's our duty to continue to promote that. I think I would put it in a more pragmatic manner. I think there are two key things here in order to build trust. To build trust, of course, it's very difficult. To lose trust is very easy. So there is a continuous effort to build trust. And how to build trust? I think there are two ways. And one is, and they are not excluding each other. One is, being more efficient. And that's what we are doing within NATO, within the European Union. We are trying to build more efficient institutions. That's this process, NATO 2030 about, and the new strategic concept. And the Conference for the Future of Europe is for the same thing. But it adds one more aspect, which is participation. The participation of the citizens in the process of making the institutions more efficient. Well, we don't have that directly as far as NATO is concerned, because dealing with security issues is paradoxically easier from the conceptual way than building, help for the whole aspects, the rest of the aspects of the society, which the EU is doing. But the Conference for the Future of Europe is the greatest opportunity ever to bring all and every citizen aboard for this effort to make the EU institutions more efficient. So efficiency and participation. If we become more efficient, both NATO and the EU, and also the member states of the European Union, the allies within NATO, our partners as well, because we cannot be resilient and efficient without our partners. We can't build trust in ourselves if we cannot be able to build trust for the partners in themselves. So all these are interconnected. So to close this short intervention, I could speak more about, for instance, what we are planning to do within the community of democracies as presidency of this organization. We have extended for one more year. So we have already 2 years and one more year by September 2022, the presidency of the community. We will work together with our US friends, for instance, for the preparation of the Summit for Democracies, which President Biden is willing to organize. But beyond that, I think the key to, the answer to all this, in order to cope with the challenges of the post-pandemic world, are a stronger EU, a stronger and more efficient NATO, building strategic resilience for both the organizations, the member states of the two organizations, and for the partners, and working with like-minded partners in the world. And of course, this is not, the whole answer, but I think these are the main elements. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Šefčovič, you have the last remark.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think Jan's opened a very fundamental question, trust and support of the public opinion. Because when I was responsible before for Energy Union, we had a lot of international discussions on climate change, we've been canvassing the support for the Paris Agreement. And when I was listening to the foreign leaders, they always told me, I mean, for you in Europe, it's easy because you have such a strong public support for the green policies. And of course, it's true, but of course you have to work very hard for having it, that the people have to be convinced, they have to be ready to support it, not only, I would say, in declaratory terms, but also in what we see are quite important industrial, behavioral changes through which the Europe goes, because it's really the big transformation which affects everyone. So I totally agree with the minister that to earn the trust, it's very difficult and you can lose it very, very quickly. And in this aspect, I just would like to bring one additional point, and this is that I think we have to invest as much as possible in our youth and to find a way how we can teach better these digital natives the art of critical thinking. the art of assessing the information which is sent to them through different algorithms to the Facebooks, Instagrams, or other social media platforms. That they are not just taking this as a given, that they should really look for other sources and be a little bit critical about what they are reading about, because we see how these opinion bubbles are very often bringing huge divisions in the society, and we see it everywhere. And therefore, I think the part of the curriculum for the 21st century should be not only, I would say, digital skills, but also critical thinking of the information which is on this platform presented, I would say, to all the generations, but we know that the youngsters spend most time on the digital platforms. And I think that, and I'm very glad that the Minister was so precise and explicit about the conference on future of Europe, because it's a new opportunity. It's a new way which we are starting, how we want to discuss and debate with Europeans. If you have a time, visit the digital platform, because it's the first time we are using artificial intelligence for almost automatic translation. So the Romanian can discuss with the Estonian and with the Slovak at the same time in their own languages, and it's automatically translated. And I think it gives some kind of, special attraction to the tool. But what would be very important from us, to support it and to bring to the discussion the topics which are interesting for the people. I know that there are some topics which are interesting for the people living in a Brussels bubble, but I know that in all corners of Europe, the people would like to discuss other things, like, future of jobs, future of the industry, the perspective of the region, what will happen with a city in 10, 15 years, and what they have to learn to be always very much, in a good side of that competition on the labor market. And that's, I think, the opportunity we have, and hopefully we will use that conference on the future of Europe for advancing, the democratic thinking and the way how we adopt the decision in Europe. But thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being on this panel. I think we managed to cover quite a good number of issues which are going to be discussed further throughout the next 3 days. It's been a wonderful set of the stage. Thank you, the three speakers. Please join me in thanking them.
Here we go.